You're listening to the Biohackers World podcast.
Welcome back. We are live at 5, but it's not 5 o'clock. It is 3 o'clock right now in Chicago at Biohackers World, and I am here with Dr. Nathan Bryan, who is a leading, probably the world's leading researcher in nitric oxide. So I am super excited to talk to you today. We talked a little bit offline, but why don't you tell people about yourself just so that they can get an idea of who you are?
I'm a small town Texas boy. Grew up in rural Texas and went to University of Texas, got a degree in biochemistry. From there, I went to LSU School of Medicine. I completed a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology. And then I trained in Boston, the Boston Medical Center and the Whitaker Cardiovascular Institute. And from the past 30 years, I've been studying nitric oxide, how the human body makes this gas, what goes wrong in people that can't make it. And then once we understood that, we started developing product technology that restores nitric oxide production.
I think most people might only know about nitric oxide because it's part of the mechanism of action in like Viagra, right?
Right.
I mean, am I wrong?
No, so Viagra so it's part of the signaling pathway. But Viagra is not a nitric oxide donating drug. In fact, many physicians misunderstand that. So nitric oxide activates a second messenger system and activates cyclic GMP and leads to cyclic GMP, and then the PDE5 inhibitors prevent the breakdown of cyclic GMP. And so that's what initiates smooth muscle relaxation and vasodilation that allows for engorgement and erections in both men and women. But we know, these drugs have been approved on the market for more than 26 years now, and only 50% of the men that are prescribed Viagra or any other PDE5 inhibitor respond with better erections. So 50% of the men don't respond. And the explanation for that is because their body is not making enough nitric oxide to activate that second messenger system for these drugs to work on. So that told us 25 years ago that erectile dysfunction is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. So if we can correct nitric oxide production, we can correct erectile dysfunction and improve performance. Improve sexual performance, improve athletic performance, improve cognitive performance.
So in other words, listen up to the rest of this podcast.
That's right. It's all about blood flow.
That's right. So tell me, what sort of got you interested in this in the first place?
In the late 90s, in 1998, a Nobel Prize had just been awarded in physiology of medicine for the discovery of nitric oxide as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. I was a new student at LSU School of Medicine, and one of the guys who won the Nobel Prize came and gave a lecture and talked about his really journey of discovery and what nitric oxide is, what led to a Nobel Prize for him and 2 other U.S. scientists. And he told me, and I had a conversation with him after that, and he says, Nathan, if we can figure out, we, the scientific community, can figure out how to restore the production of nitric oxide and develop safe and effective therapies, it'll change the world. Because at that time, even 25 years ago, it was recognized that if every single age-related chronic disease was associated with a loss of nitric oxide production. So if you lose nitric oxide, you lose the ability to regulate blood flows, you develop hypoxia and ischemia, you get runaway inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. And that explains every chronic disease. And so if we can restore the production of nitric oxide, we dilate the blood vessels, we perfuse the end organ, we eliminate the inflammation, we correct the inhibit the oxidative stress, and we correct the immune dysfunction. So it addresses the root cause of all chronic disease. And I go, as a young, naive student, I thought, well, that's a pretty profound statement. So I started my journey there and trying to figure out, okay, how do we detect nitric oxide in biological systems? Because once it's produced, it's gone in less than a second.
So how do you do that?
Well, my early work was trying to figure that out. Once nitric oxide is produced, where does it go, what does it become, and how does it signal? Because even though it's around for only 1 second or less, it activates so many second messenger systems.
Okay.
So we created a fingerprint of nanobiology in different disease states so that we knew if we could restore nitric oxide production, we could dictate and control the metabolic fate of nitric oxide, and not only recapitulate its production, but recapitulate the signaling. And that was what led to now dozens of issued patents and product technology that's based on understanding how the human body makes nitric oxide, what leads to a loss of nitric oxide production, and then restoring the natural production and signaling.
It's fascinating. So I know there are a number of different molecules or processes, right, that we've heard about over the last decade or so,
Sure.
right? A lot of which sort of have the same they have the same definition of being at the root cause, right? Like at first it was like, oh, NAD, right? Like NAD is related to a lot of different processes. So if we are deficient in NAD, it's sort of like, and they were like, oh, just simply give more NAD, right? How does something like this molecule, right, differ from something like NAD? And so how do you describe where it's at that root cause?
Well, look, to answer that question, we have to figure out mechanistically how does the human body make nitric oxide? And there's two ways. There's an enzyme that's found in our endothelial cells. That enzyme is called nitric oxide synthase. That enzyme, for it to be functional, requires 8 different cofactors and substrates. NADPH being one of those. Magnesium, oxygen, iron, flavin-dependent cofactors. So if your body's deficient in any of those nutrients, then you're going to be dysfunctional in your body's ability to make nitric oxide through that enzyme. So we understand the enzymology and the biochemistry of how that reaction takes place. And then number 2 is through the oral bacteria, right? And so we have to restore the normal oral flora and prevent the antiseptic nature of fluoride toothpaste and antiseptic mouthwash, because these bacteria that live in and on our body, part of their role is to help produce nitric oxide gas. So nitric oxide is what we call foundational, but it's not a panacea. It's not an end-all be-all cure-all, right? 75% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. We have to replete magnesium. It's involved in 800 biochemical reactions. NAD is a very important cofactor that if you're not replete in, then obviously the cell can't do its job. So we have to focus on nutrient deficiencies. And we have to focus on removing toxins that are interfering with the body's normal biochemistry and physiology. And when you do that, the body heals itself. So what we focused on very specifically is how the body makes nitric oxide and how do we optimize that. And over the past 25 or 30 years, we've certainly elucidated that mechanism, and now we know how to address it.
I love the way you described that, right? Because I think so often folks are looking for the one pill,
bullet.
Right? They want to be able to take 1 or 2 pills. You and I know that. But I think it's really important to continue to point out that we talked earlier today, right? It's about having a toolkit, and my levels are going to be different than your levels of a lot of different things, right? And so being able to test, being able to see where those deficiencies lie, and really that becomes the basis at which we're trying to balance at the cellular level, right? Because if we have, I don't know what I'm trying to recall what the number is. It's something like 1 million trillion, chemical reactions every second, or whatever that is, right? In our bodies.
Complex.
Yeah, it's a really complex machine. It's no Toyota, right?
That's right? It's
much more complex, and so being able to balance things at the cellular level so that they don't sort of magnify those deficiencies, right? And upchain, and so that's where we get these disease states. That's where we get major deficiencies is big. And I have to say, I've been in this space a long time. NO is not something that is sort of really front and center of a lot of conversations. How are you seeing that change?
When I started in this field over 30 years ago, 25 years ago, there were about 30,000 scientific papers in the published literature. Today there are over 200,000. But it's still not mainstream, and I think there's several reasons. We know on average it takes about 17 years for new discoveries to become standard of care front and center. The discovery of nitric oxide is now almost 40 years old. So we're certainly past that average of 17 years. The challenge for us, and I think the confusion that occurs not only in conventional medicine but in consumers, is that there's a lot of companies out there selling nitric oxide products that do not work, that do not provide nitric oxide, that do not activate nitric oxide production. So when consumers take these nitric oxide products and they don't get a benefit from it, they think that nitric oxide doesn't work for them. And physicians, most conventional physicians, don't use supplements as part of their therapeutic armament, right? If it's not a prescription they can write, then they ignore it. So what we're trying to do is change that conversation. We provide nitric oxide products that actually produce nitric oxide gas. So I had to coin a term to differentiate us, and we call it nitroceuticals. So what we do, we're not nutraceuticals. We're nitroceuticals. Every product, and we trademarked it, but every product that we bring to market produces nitric oxide gas. And we can detect it, we can quantify it, we can verify it. If it doesn't, we don't bring it to market. So if your body can't make it, then we make it for you. But we also, based on 25 years of research, we understand how to fix the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels. We understand how to recreate the ecology in the mouth to restore the normal nitric oxide producing bacteria. And so we fix the reason your body can't make it. But now we're moving into drug therapies. We're taking that same technology, moving it through the FDA. So now, when we get our drugs approved on the market, physicians will have a drug that they can prescribe. And once it becomes part of the standard of care and prescriptive medication that's going to safely treat many, many diseases, it'll become mainstream, and it will be, it'll certainly change the world. And I anticipate it'll be the most prescribed drug around the world.
So interestingly, a lot of different molecules, right, function differently, whether you take them, whether you inhale them, whether you put them on your skin, right? I can think of copper as a great example. Just since we're at a biohacking conference now, right? I can inject it in, and I can get systemic sort of benefits for all kinds of injuries and things like that. I can put it on my face, literally in a cream, and get really visible results that way. I think that's the same with your product. Tell me a little bit about what you're using this for on an external basis.
Well, this has been a journey for me. So I'm motivated. So number one, once we figured out how to make nitric oxide, then the first thing we did was create an orally disintegrating tablet. Right. So we put this lozenge in our mouth. I designed it to have a resident time of 5 to 6 minutes because I want to release a certain amount of nitric oxide over a certain period of time to recapitulate production and signaling. So that's our orally disintegrating tablet. And then Beats became a popular product in the 2012 Olympic Games in London. But again, most Beets products on the market provide no nitric oxide benefit.
And this is, by the way, literal beets.
Literal beets.
Yes.
Yeah, dark beetroot juice.
I love beets, but not at the quantity that I would need probably to make a meaningful benefit.
Yeah, and most of the powders and beet products on the market provide no nitric oxide benefit, and that was a problem. So we created a fermented beet powder that actually produces nitric oxide gas. But about 12 years ago, my dad, who's a paraplegic from a car accident in 1984, a T11 compression injury, left him paralyzed from the mid back down.
Wow.
So for the past 30, 40 years, I've dealt with decubitus ulcers on my dad, non-healing wounds, paraplegic, diabetic, elderly, and all the wound care docs in the world said, can't heal this wound on it. And so I started developing a nitric oxide releasing gauze to heal this wound, and I killed the infection, got tissue granulation, and we healed this non-healing 4-year-old decubitus ulcer, stage 4
That's
ulcer,
amazing.
when the best wound care treatment out there failed. And then all the doctors and wound care doctors said, okay, we need this. So obviously developing drug therapy to take this through the FDA is on average 10 years and $800 million to bring a drug to market. So I launched this as a skincare product back in 2019 because the skin is an organ, right?
Yep.
And just like the heart or the sex organs, if you don't have adequate blood flow, that organ fails. So I developed a dual chamber topical serum that when you mix these two components together, it generates nitric oxide gas. You apply it to the face, it improves blood flow, recruits capillaries, improves hydration, collagen deposition, fine lines and wrinkles disappear, tone, texture, and clarity of the skin improve. We've got 6 published clinical trials in the peer-reviewed literature. It's amazing for skincare and beauty. And now we're taking that same technology through the FDA for non-healing wounds, diabetic ulcers, because to me, it's 65,000 Americans die in nursing homes every year from getting infected wounds that become septic and they die. And we have technology that'll heal a wound. We haven't seen a wound we haven't been able to heal with our nitric oxide. So that's exciting. We're developing, inhalative nitric oxide therapy, which you mentioned has been used for 30 years. It's approved for premature babies with pulmonary hypertension. So we know it's extremely safe in the most vulnerable population that exist.
Well, that's a pretty powerful statement, by the way. If you're not leading with that all the time, I don't know. That's a crazy. That is an unbelievable. That's an unbelievable fact.
Yeah, and it's saved millions of babies' lives. So when they're underdeveloped and they have pulmonary hypertension, nitric oxide gas dilates the pulmonary arteries, relieves the pulmonary hypertension, matches ventilation to perfusion, and they can fully oxygenate. And so we use what works in terms of safety to dial in that same level of nitric oxide that we know is safe in the most vulnerable population in the world, premature babies. And that's what we try to recapitulate. So we have an impeccable safety study. In fact, we had a drug during COVID, during phase 3 clinical trials in COVID, and we treated over 600 really, really sick, high-risk patients. Some of these patients are on 20 different prescription medications.
Wow.
And there was no safety signal. So no unsafe drop in blood pressure, no interactions with at least 20 different class of medications. So we feel very good about safety. Now it's just dialing in the level of nitric oxide or dose of nitric oxide for heart disease, for Alzheimer's, and we're working on that now.
So what about Healthspan? So, there's some amazing things for people who already are in some sort of disease state or, have an injury, right? What about for people like me and people like the audience who are looking to optimize to really gain that health span? First of all, how do they get started, right? And then secondly, what should they expect?
Well, I tell people the science of nitric oxide is complex, but sometimes a solution can be simple. So we got to stop doing the things that are inhibiting natural nitric oxide production, then start doing the things that promote it. So if you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. Anything that kills the microbiome is detrimental and shuts down nitric oxide production. You got to get rid of fluoride in your toothpaste, fluoride in your drinking water. You got to wean off antacids. If you're on antacids, you have to get off antacids. Completely shut down nitric oxide production. Now you've released the brakes on the body's ability to produce nitric oxide naturally. Moderate physical exercise, intermittent fasting, a balanced diet in moderation, elimination of sugar and simple carbohydrates that lead to an increase in glucose. And that optimizes the body's natural production of nitric oxide. And so in terms of longevity and health span, we know that nitric oxide activates telomerase, prevents telomere shortening. We know that it activates mitochondrial biogenesis. So you have more mitochondria per cell generating more energy more efficiently. And it mobilizes stem cells. So we can repair and replace dysfunctional cells. So if you optimize nitric oxide production, you're going to live, that's the foundation for a longer, healthier life free of disease.
Do you have data that outlines what healthy nitric oxide levels are in healthy centenarians or, older folks?
There's data published out there that look at age-related decline in nitric oxide production. And what this is looking at the function of the enzyme. And so in these experiments, they infuse acetylcholine or bradykinin into brachial arteries or coronary arteries and look at the resultant vasodilation. So on average, we lose about 10 to 12% of our nitric oxide function per decade.
Okay,
so by the time we're 40 or 50, we have about 50%. When you're 70 or 80 or 90, you have about 10%. But now we know we can shift that to the left or right. We can accelerate that loss or we can decelerate and prevent the loss.
It's interesting because it reminds me of what we kind of previously thought about muscle and sarcopenia, right?
That's
Which
right.
was the older we got, we lose X percent per decade, and then shocker, right? Correlation, not causation.
That's right.
And so that's really interesting and sort of, on one hand, not surprising, right? Like the body, again, is an unbelievable machine, and if we give it the tools that it needs, we can actually restore that function.
That's right.
Very fascinating. So here we got these optimizers, right? These biohackers. Is this something that people should be looking at? So let's say we're doing all the things, and we're cutting out the things that we need to do, and we're doing the exercise, right? And we really have the lifestyle piece set in. What sort of bump in optimization, efficiency, performance am I going to get if I am supplementing, even if I'm at peak optimal levels?
Yeah. Well, we've tested this in well-trained athletes, Olympic athletes. They still can get a bump in performance and improvement, even though they're optimized, right? So-called optimized. And then, for the average kind of weekend warrior, average Joe, we can really optimize them. We can, improve mitochondrial efficiency. We can mobilize their stem cells so recovery's better. We can oxygenate the tissues and lead to less lactic acid buildup, so recovery's going to be better. But for me, it's about blood flow and adequate blood flow. So if you want to improve your performance, whether it's sexual performance, you got to have adequate blood flow to the pelvic region. Cognitive performance, you've got to have adequate blood flow and perfusion to the brain. Athletic performance to the heart, to the skeletal muscle. And so if you can't make nitric oxide to regulate blood flow and oxygen delivery and have efficient mitochondria for ATP production, you're not optimized. So again, nitric oxide is foundational for everything we know about health, longevity, and human optimization.
You're causing me to have to pause and think because there's stuff in here that I didn't know, and I know a lot, right? So it's fascinating. Do you know that if there's any data on GLPs and like microdosing or anything like that, and that effect on that enzymatic process?
Here's what we know about the GLP-1 agonists. So they're very effective at people with morbid obesity that have trouble losing weight, right? So it reduces appetite, and so there's known side effects of that, right? So they can cause gastroparesis, they can cause muscle loss, bone loss.
Well, if you get the right amount of protein,
That's right.
and we can keep the muscle
yeah,
there.
so you can mitigate all that. So nitric oxide can overcome the gastroparesis side effects of GLP-1, but you still have to get adequate protein.
Sure.
And you want to break down fat and not protein. But no, I think in combination, if you use these drugs effectively and mitigate the side effects of them and the risk, they can be very effective. And I think they're very, very valuable tools in the toolbox.
This is fascinating. I'd love to have a deeper conversation on this because I think there's probably some downstream stuff that I could dig into. But Nathan, thank you so much. Thanks for bringing us in. Tell people where they can find you, and we'll wrap it up.
You know, I encourage people to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, Nitric Oxide. For me, it's about education, awareness around nitric oxide. I'm on social media, Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, I'm Dr. Nitric. I encourage you to read my book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bring the Science to Life. You can find that at nathansbook.com or anywhere books are sold. For those interested in our products, it's n101.com.
Nathan, thank you so much. This is definitely something that you guys should pay attention to and do a little bit of reading and try something out. I think this might be the next thing on my list. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Come join us at Biohacker Miami, November 1st and 2nd.